Welcome back to another session of the Midweek Refuel, where we break out the dusty old tomes in order to retrieve what has been lost to time. My name is Pastor John Widdifield from Remnant Church in Fuquay Varina, North Carolina, and you can find a link to the church's website down in the description below. I hope you'll visit. Take a moment to sign up for our emails while you're looking down there if you haven't already done so, and also make sure to smack that bell and let us know that these lessons are a blessing to you, and I really hope that they are. It's why we do this at all. There is nothing so satisfying, nothing so fulfilling as a well-crafted Augustinian witticism. Am I right? Theological and philosophical zingers are some of the most ignored and neglected comedy genres, I'm afraid. I'm sure that given enough time, they'll have their day in the eternal spotlight, or at least a decent spot in the divine comedy. Oh no, the cheesiness doesn't end there, folks. Buckle up, Buttercup. Brace yourself as you begin to understand why I did indeed choose seminary over the improv. Why did Augustine bring a clock to his study session on time? Well, because he wanted to understand the present moment. But it kept ticking him off with all the time it took to explain the past and the future. Why did Augustine become a philosopher about time? Well, because when he asked, what did God do before creating heaven and earth, he realized the answer was just waiting for someone to ask the question. Turns out even in eternity, you can't escape a good philosophical riddle. Augustine walked into a bar and ordered a drink. The bartender asked, past, present, or future? And Augustine replied, I can't choose. It's all happening at once in God's eternal now. The bartender shook his head and said, great, another philosopher who thinks happy hour is forever. So, what's the takeaway here? Well, the takeaway is obviously leave comedy to the professionals and stick to theology. I would take a poll about it, but I'm far too old to switch gears now, so theology it is. And while my jokes might not be winning any awards, Augustine's question, his question about time, certainly is a head scratcher, isn't it? He asked, quote, may I hear and understand, unquote. What a beautiful beginning. He actually says, quote, may I hear and understand how in the beginning you made heaven and earth, unquote. What is it to create? Do we even know what it means to create? What is it to even begin to create when time itself has not been created? We look for a starting point, a beginning, but all we find is the endless now, both philosophically and cosmologically. God's eternal present. It's like trying to find the first act in a play that's always been running. In our search for the beginning, we're not just unraveling a mystery. We're stepping into the divine reality, into the divine comedy that defies our linear sense of time and existence. It is a journey that takes us beyond the limits of understanding into the heart of God's eternal mystery. I practiced talking like Rod Sterling for a whole week for last week's Jumpstart sermon, and now I can't shake it. It makes one understand why some actors go nuts. They forget themselves by channeling all these other personalities like poor old Jim Carrey did, or they end up jumping the shark like poor Charlie Sheen did. It must be a very hard existence to channel other personalities for too long. We want some starting point, some beginning, some in the beginning. And oddly enough, it is our confusion with the starting point that drives scientific positivism and materialistic scientists out of their minds, drives them insane. While browsing the internet, I ran into this interesting quotation, quote, the question of what caused the Big Bang remains one of the most profound mysteries in cosmology. While the Big Bang theory effectively explains the expansion of the universe from an initial state of high density and temperature, the actual cause of the Big Bang, what triggered this initial expansion, remains unknown, unquote. Well, it remains unknown to the 5 time and space-bound senses that we generally acknowledge as the only senses, but we have another sense, which is spoken about in many other religions, a sense that is in contact with the divine and a sense that is open to communication with eternity itself. When I compare religions, I do not do it in the customary collegiate, university, critical way using critical theory. I do not wish to show them to be equal. I do not wish to show all religions as equal. I do not wish to denigrate anyone else's tradition or belief. But at the same time, I most definitely believe that Christianity has a corner on the market as far as theological consistency and experiential evidence go. That being said, a blind person does indeed know when it's cold just as clearly as a sighted person knows when it's cold. Just because other religions may fall far short of the mark, studying them does equip the Christian with the knowledge that the human struggle and the human endeavor are the same across the global cultures. It also shows us glimmers of the broken image of God within us as it desperately tries to piece itself back together from the catastrophe in the garden in the midst of all the worldly confusion and spiritual deceptions that present themselves to us to keep us off track. Comparative religious studies are valuable in that we can find similar threads of thought. Comparative religious studies fall short, far short, however, in their self-inflicted boundary of being incapable, and in some cases even against the suggested rules in the introduction to the text, to please check your brain at the door, of judging between options. They do a surface study of the material and say, hey, look, they are all the same, aren't they? Unquote. Instead of the real spiritual work of discerning the spirits and discovering the fundamental truths or errors that underpin the different belief systems. This deeper exploration goes beyond merely acknowledging shared moral principles or even common myths. It involves engaging with the theological and philosophical foundations of each religion. The religions that teach about something akin to the spiritual sense, or what I call the faith sense, are wide and they are varied. Just off the top of my head, I can think of Hinduism's Siddhi, which refers to the supernatural powers or abilities that can be developed through spiritual practice. I think of Islam, and it has its Ghaib, which means the unseen. With Ghaib, one can experience aspects of reality that are beyond normal human perception, such as angels and what they call the jinn. New Age and esoteric traditions embrace the sixth sense as the spiritual part of us that, according to them, opens the door to extrasensory perception, intuition, and other psychic abilities. Many indigenous pagan cultures, including Native Americans, especially the Lakota, the Navajo, and the Inuit, use all sorts of means and methods, and theogens being a particular favorite of shamans, to experience the divine. Even scientists like Huxley used drugs in order to get into contact with these peripheral realities. You can read about his experience in the pages of his great work, The Doors of Perception, the same book that the Doors base their name on. Many of us are caught up in the trance-inducing voodoo beats that have made their way into the synagogue and into the churches. Have you ever noticed that the longer they repeat the voodoo cyclical beat, the musical cycle, the more trance-like the service becomes? It starts to have more in common with a rave party than a church service. The final religion on the list that teaches ways to experience the transcendent is, of course, Christianity itself. I personally believe that Christianity is the only way through which one can or should view reality. Its foundations are incredibly stable. They are perfectly stable, and its teachings are timeless and intense. Any other use of the sixth sense is done through a broken vessel, a vessel that has been tainted by sin. It is like looking through a pair of broken glasses. Sure, you might think you're seeing things clearly, but really you're just waving at strangers thinking they're your long lost cousin. It's like this. Imagine you put on these cracked, foggy glasses and suddenly everything is a Picasso painting, beautifully abstract yet utterly confusing. You think you see a dog, but it's actually a fire hydrant. You think you're walking towards enlightenment, but you're really just stumbling into the transcendental meditation and tofu emporium by mistake. And then there's that moment when you squint and tilt your head, thinking you finally made sense of a cosmic secret, only to realize you're just staring at a smudge on the lens. With Christianity, it's like finally getting that prescription adjusted. Suddenly, everything snaps into focus. You can see the road ahead, you can understand the signs, and you can even avoid stepping into existential potholes. It's a clear, direct path, unlike the kaleidoscopic detour that other broken glass perspectives might offer to you. So, while other systems might show you some things, only Christianity offers the full, unbroken view. Just like getting a new pair of glasses that actually help you see clearly instead of making you question your sanity. Well, we've spent a good bit of time and a good bit of this particular lesson going over perspectives and how perspectives, especially perspectives rooted in time, can both make things clearer and also shroud things in deep and opaque mystery. And it is here, at the limits of human perception, that Augustine begins to realize the absolute glory of the opening lines of Genesis. And God said, before time, before the Big Bang, before anything, God said. And it was then that both literally and figuratively, the lights came on. Let there be light. Before God said, there was nothing. If you think we are technologically and scientifically advanced, then I hope you get a little kick out of this misconception. One day, an atheist scientist challenged God to a contest, claiming that modern science could create life just as well as the divine could. God agreed and told the scientist to please go first. He's a gentleman, after all. The scientist bent down to scoop up a handful of dirt, ready to show off his creation skills, but God interrupted him and said, "Oh, no. You need to get your own dirt." If you want to play God, best have the chops to do it. As with all human technologies and discoveries, give it a good 1,000 years, and our children's children will be laughing their stomach sore at how backward and barbaric we actually are. They did what to their children? They did what to their babies? They did what to each other and the foundation of society in the name of progress? Future generations will look back and wonder how we could have strayed so far from common sense and time-tested values. They'll read about how we allowed the breakdown of the family unit, questioned the most basic biological truths, and let moral relativism run rampant. They'll be astonished that we abandoned personal responsibility and individual liberty for the sake of so-called progressive ideals. Our era, with its rampant censorship and erosion of free speech, will seem like a cautionary tale of what happens when a society loses its way. To them, our current state will be a reminder of the dangers of abandoning tradition and the wisdom of the past. They'll see us as a generation that thought it was enlightened, but was, in reality, fumbling around in the dark. They'll be thankful for the resurgence of common sense and values that guide their time, having learned from our mistakes that not all change is progress. Let's let Augustine speak, if we will. Turn with me to Book 11, chapters 3 through 6, and I have broken the book up along the same identification marks used in the Everyman's Library edition. So we will be specifically starting in chapter 6, paragraph 8. If you need a copy, you can grab one from Project Gutenberg. I hope you will. May I hear and understand how in the beginning you made heaven and earth? This Moses wrote. He wrote and departed. He passed on from here to you and is not now before me. If he were, I'd lay hold of him and ask him and beseech him through you to explain these things to me. I would incline the ears of my body to hear the sounds that burst from his lips. If he spoke Hebrew, his voice would batter against my senses in vain, nor would my mind grasp any of what he said. But if he spoke in Latin, I would know what he said. But how would I know whether he spoke the truth? And if I did know this, would it be from Moses that I knew it? It is within me, within the chamber of my meditation, that the truth speaks, not in Hebrew, nor in Greek, or Latin, or any outlandish speech, without lips, without vocal organs, without sound of syllables. He would say, Moses speaks true. Immediately, I would say to Moses, the man of God, with full confidence in him, you speak true. Being therefore unable to question him, it is you, O truth, that I ask. You, my God, who inspired Moses to speak, I ask to have mercy on my sins. You, who granted him, your servant, to speak, grant me also to understand. Behold, heaven and earth exist. They cry out that they are created, for they are subject to change and variation. But in anything that exists and was not created, there is nothing that was not previously, for that is change and variation. Heaven and earth cry out that they did not make themselves. We exist because we were made. Before we existed, we did not exist and could not be made by ourselves. The sound of their voice is itself the evidence. It was you, therefore, O Lord, that made them. You, the beautiful, for they are beautiful. You, the good, for they are good. You, who are, for they are. They are not beautiful, nor good, nor existent in the way that you are, their establisher, compared to whom they are neither beautiful, nor good, nor existent. We know all this, and thanks be to you, and our knowledge compared to your knowledge is ignorance. But how did you make heaven and earth? And what was the instrument of this mighty handiwork of yours? You were not like a human craftsman, shaping one physical object out of another according to the judgment of his soul, which has the ability to impose as it will the form that it perceives from within the inner eye. And whence would it have this ability, were it not that you had made it? Moreover, such a craftsman imposes this form on a body that already exists and has the means of existence, such as earth or stone or wood or gold or anything of this sort. And whence would all these things have existence had you not established them? It is you who made the workman's body, you who made the mind that commands the limbs, you who made the material from which he makes what he makes, you who made the intelligence by which he understands his trade and sees within what he should make without. You who made the physical sense that acts as intermediary, communicating from mind to material that which he is making, and bringing in return news of what has been made, so that the mind may consult inwardly the truth that reigns over it to find out if the thing is well done. All these things praise you, the creator of all. But as for you, how do you make them? How, O God, did you make heaven and earth? Assuredly, you did not make heaven and earth, nor in the air, nor in the waters, for these belong to heaven and earth. Not in the universe did you make the universe, for before it came to be, there was nowhere that it could come to be. Nor did you hold in your hand anything from which to make heaven and earth. For whence could you have had this material, not made by yourself, from which to make other things? What exists, but that you exist? Thus it was, therefore, you spoke, and they were made. By your word, you made them. But how did you speak? Surely not in the way that the voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my well-beloved Son." That speech was uttered and passed away. It began and ended. The syllables rang out and passed on, the second after the first, the third after the second, and so on in sequence until the last succeeded the rest, and silence the last. Hence, it is clear and apparent that this speech was uttered by some movement of your creation, obedient to your eternal will, yet temporal. These words, made in time, were reported by the outward ear to the mind that foresaw them, whose inward ears is inclined to hear your eternal word. That mind then compared these words, audible and temporal, with your word that remains eternally in silence, and says, "It is not the same, it is not the same at all. These words are far below me and are not, for they hasten on and pass away, but the word of my God abides above me forever." If then you spoke with words that ring out and pass away when you commanded heaven and earth to come into existence and thus made heaven and earth, then there was already a physical creation before heaven and earth by temporal movements of which that utterance ran its temporal course. But there was nothing physical before heaven and earth. Or if there was, then surely without transitory speech you made the means by which you made that transitory speech, thereby commanding that heaven and earth should be. For whatever the means were by which that speech came to be, it would not exist at all were it not made by you. What word then did you speak when you commanded that there should be a physical entity by which those words should be? What exists but that you exist? God exists somewhere outside of time. Yes, he is here with us. Yes, he did indeed pitch his tent with his people. Yes, he did indeed come as a man and lived and died and resurrected among us within our own space-time manifold. Time, words, music, math, dance, and everything that we enjoy and everything that we endure are nothing but the flow of time across our awareness. Perhaps it has already happened, and our minds must chop it up into bite-sized chunks for us to even comprehend it. Perhaps God is outside of time, but again, maybe every when is an eternal every now within the mind of God. God, gravity, and time hold this universe together, and in the blink of an eye, in the briefest moment it takes to say stop, the whole edifice will come to a grinding halt at the command of the eternal systems administrator. Think about how often we worry about the future or dwell on the past. We stress over deadlines. We regret past mistakes. We get anxious about what might happen tomorrow. But Augustine reminds all of us that God exists in an eternal present. He isn't bound by the ticking clock like we are. This doesn't mean we shouldn't plan for the future or learn from the past, but it does offer us a different perspective, doesn't it? When we feel overwhelmed by the pressures of time, we can find comfort in knowing that God is always with us in this very moment. We can trust that our timelines don't limit his plans for us. This understanding can help us focus on the present, be fully present in our relationships, and find peace even in the midst of vast uncertainty. Time is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be lived. We aren't going to figure out time, nor are we going to figure out the mind of God in today's lesson. What we will instead do is stand back and stand amazed, like Augustine and every honest and intelligent scientist throughout time have done before us. We will be thankful for each moment that washes over us as gift, for if time is still washing over us, then we are still alive. And if you are still alive, then you have the opportunity to use your sixth sense to come into contact with the very lover of your soul. We won't figure out time, but perhaps we can use it. If this were the History Channel, then I would tell you all to make sure to tune in next week for an examination of how certain fringe scientists believe that the temple was an actual time machine that used the Ark of the Covenant as its power source. But it would be a waste of time. We all know that that was the pyramids. Besides, I use my time to do one thing and one thing only, and that is to tell you this: Christ is King. Hail to the King.